All right, hello everybody. This is Antonio Wolf. Haven't done one of these in a while. I know you all love them, but well, I love them too, but it's a different kind of love. Uh, I am going to do a little bit of a commentary on the animal ethics debate between prospective philosophy and Has from infrared. Uh, One of these sides is not like the other. Both of these people claim to be, in some significant way, Hegelian. Has less so, but still, I mean, he considers himself a typical Marxist-Leninist, which he's not, but that's neither here nor there. Uh, but I will say that in this debate, it was very clear to me that Has had a far better grasp of the issues than perspective philosophy is. Perspective philosophy explicitly calls himself a Hegelian, which, after this critique, hopefully you understand why that is not even questionable. It's just a fact that he's not. And I don't know why he would want to claim that he is. I mean, it's not like it gives you cred or anything. I mean, sure, it makes you seem weird, and supposedly, I suppose that makes you stand out from the crowd. Uh, but it's just kind of a weird thing to claim, especially when obviously you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Uh, I will begin this by quoting the relevant part that clinches the argument towards one side, such that, at least on the face of what perspective philosophy claims, that he's making an argument from a Hegelian perspective, he is just outright 100% absolutely wrong. This is from the Philosophy of Right, Oxford edition, which came out a couple of years ago. And let me read to you. It's going to be a bit of a section. It's about 2 pages, but it sets up what I want to say. So, 4. The basis of right is, in general, the realm of spirit. Its precise place and point of origin is the will. The will is free, so that freedom is both its substance and its goal, while the system of right is the realm of freedom made actual, the world of spirit, brought forth out of itself as a second nature. Big emphasis on the basis of right is, in general, the realm of spirit. Its precise place and point of origin is the will. So right's origin is in the will. Keep that in mind. Addition. The freedom of the will is best explained by reference to a physical nature. For freedom is just as fundamental a character of the will as weight is of bodies. If we say matter is heavy, we might mean that this predicate is only contingent. But it is nothing of the kind, for nothing in matter is without weight. Matter is rather weight itself. Heaviness constitutes the body and is the body. The same is the case with freedom and the will, since that which is free is the will. Will without freedom is an empty word, while freedom is actual only as will, as subject. The following points should be noted about the connection between the will and thought. Spirit is thinking in general, and the human being is distinguished from the animal in virtue of thinking. But one must not imagine that the human being is, on the one hand, thought, and on the other, will, and that he keeps thought in one pocket and will in another, for this would be a foolish idea. The distinction between thought and will is only that between the theoretical attitude and the practical. These, however, are surely not two faculties. The will is rather a particular way of thinking translating itself into existence, thinking as the urge to give itself existence. This distinction between thought and will may be described as follows. In thinking an object, I make it into thought and deprive it of its sensuous aspect. I make it into something which is immediately and essentially mine. Since it is only in thought that I am with myself, I do not penetrate an object until I understand it. It then ceases to stand over against me, and I have taken from it the character of its own, which it had in opposition to me. Just as Adam said to Eve, "Thou art flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone," so spirit says, "This is spirit of my spirit, and its foreign character has disappeared." An idea is always a generalization, and generalization is a property of thinking. To generalize means to think. The I is thought, and so the universal. When I say I el ipso, abandon all my particular characteristics, my disposition, natural endowment, knowledge, and age. The I is quite empty, a mere point, simple, yet active in this simplicity. The variegated canvas of the worlds before me, I stand over against it by my theoretical attitude to it. I overcome its opposition to me and make its content my own. I am at home in the world when I know it, and still more so when I have understood it. So much for the theoretical attitude. The practical attitude, on the other hand, begins in thinking, in the I itself, and it appears first as though opposed to thinking because it immediately sets up a division. Insofar as I am practical or active, that is, insofar as I act, I determine myself, and to determine myself simply means to posit a difference. But these differences which I posit are still mine all the same. The determinations are mine, and the aims to which I am driven belong to me. If I now let these determinations and differences out, that is, if I posit them in the so-called external world, they nonetheless still remain mine. They are what I have done, what I have made. They bear the trace of my spirit. Such is the distinction between the theoretical attitude and the practical, but now the relation between them must be described. The theoretical is essentially contained in the practical. We must decide against the idea that the two are separate because we cannot have a will without intelligence. On the contrary, the will contains the theoretical in itself. The will determines itself, and this determination is in the first place something inward, because what I will, I hold before my mind as an idea. It is the object of my thought. An animal acts on instinct, is driven by an inner impulse, and so it too is practical, but it has no will, since it does not bring before its mind the object of its desire. A human being, however, can just as little be theoretical or think without a will, because in thinking he is of necessity being active. The content of something thought has the form of being, but this being is something mediated, something established through our activity. Thus, these distinct attitudes cannot be divorced, they are one and the same, and in any activity, whether of thinking or willing, both moments are present.
Yeah. I think this distinction is important because this whole idea of a right, of, for example, natural rights and stuff like that, is to be understood, first of all, as deriving from the will as positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot think of right without thinking of will, just as you cannot think conflicts of will without thinking right individual wills in the world, etc. So very nice beginning.
Right. So the main thing, rights originate in the will. If you care about quote mining, here's a straight up quote where this already precludes the possibility of animals having any rights and therefore us having anything called a duty towards animals. An animal acts on instinct, is driven by an inner impulse, and so it too is practical, but it has no will, since it does not bring before its mind the object of its desire. Meaning, animals do not think. Now, he doesn't explain here in further detail as to why you should conclude that animals don't think, but this is in the prior little thing about the theoretical mind. The I is thought, and so the universal. When I say I el ipso, abandon all my particular characteristics, my disposition, natural endowment, knowledge, and age. The I is quite empty, a mere point, simple yet active in this simplicity. To think the I am is to have the power to think universally. Most people want to claim that they're like, but no, I think animals think. I believe animals think more rather. And they go through this like, well, they clearly have some kind of cognitive process. You can see them, sometimes just kind of take a little second to deliberate. That's not thinking for Hegel. Thinking is universal conceptual determination. The
And
only way you can have,
self-relating.
Yeah, yeah, self-relating.
universal conceptual.
Yeah, yeah. Self-relating universal self-conceptualization. The only way you get the I am is that the entire theoretical faculty becomes your immediate object. And that's how you can have the pure abstraction of the I that has no determinations about anything except its own
And it's
immediate self
actually,
relationship.
I think it's important to say that I think one way of putting it is to say that only human beings, in the case of the planet Earth, right? Only human beings would be capable of absolute abstraction. So animals, they need, they do have a faculty of abstraction, right? But theirs are not. They are
It's
not
not
capable
universal.
of absolute. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not universal.
they can identify objects, they can attach themselves to objects, but in the thinking of I is such an it's abstractness is not a difference or a quantitative difference difference in between the abstraction of thinking about an apple, right? It's an absolute difference, right? We
Yes.
are in the field of the simply uh,
Yeah, it's pure thought. It's a
putting
pure thought.
out of any determination, the putting out of any content whatsoever, and to think as a content, this pure universality itself, right?
Right, right. And so
Um, so,
this is the meaning
so
of
it's
the
not,
animals can't think.
yeah,
Now, then people kind of bring up the issue of like, how do you know that animals don't think? How do you know that they don't actually have this presentation of the I? Well, as already been explained, the I is already the positiveness of a universal thinking process. This appears in human beings as what we call language. The way we know that human beings have this universal thinking process is that they manifest it to us in language. And the reason they manifest this in language is because language is the way in which pure meaning appears. This is why we have these abstractions which have no relevance with the immediate physical sensuous world. We can talk about being, we can talk about essence, we can talk about the eyes, which are not objects of the senses at all. They refer to no such thing. They are pure creations of thought, which relate themselves as thoughts to thought as such and reveal thought's own essence. If animals had the I, animals would be able to have language. And to have language is to have this universal capacity to communicate, not in this exact these symbols like animals do. Animals have particular communications, but they don't have universal, and they even have symbols, but they don't have a universal symbolic capacity. Whereas, you can encounter new things and you can translate symbols into other symbols pretty easily. A human being has no problem with this. No problem at all. We have yet not had a single animal in all of history that anybody has ever known that has language. You can bring up Coco the gorilla all you want. Coco the gorilla only had sign language to the extent of a set of symbols, but they could not communicate abstract concepts. They could not communicate or even translate, which the translation is even more important about anything. They could not learn another language so easily as humans can. She could not engage in the obviously immediate translation that if a human being notices that you appear suddenly in China, for example, and you don't know a lick of Chinese, you can start learning the symbolic order of the Chinese pretty quickly. Everybody knows how to do the pointing to your mouth, I'm hungry, rubbing your belly, all these things. People pick up on that because people have universal symbolic capacity, because it's the expression of thought. Animals do not have that. Animals cannot do that. Elephants cannot do that. Dolphins cannot do that. No animal has ever shown this capacity. If they did, we would know as quickly as you know that a human being has capacity for language. It's that
because we
easy.
would probably have political conflicts with them and destroy them
Yeah,
because they would have will if they
yeah,
could speak, if they thought they would have, they could. In that case, veganism would be right. You are dealing with something which is for itself, literally for itself, which means you cannot appropriate it. Uh, it is an end for itself, and as such, it cannot be appropriated. Um,
Yep. So we'd know pretty quickly they would learn language and they would tell us to fuck off.
yeah,
So I rest my case with that. Let's see what perspective philosophy says about his supposed Hegelian perspective that animals do have rights.
I'm curious. Let's go.
Starting now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. All right. So, animals are inherently valuable, consciousness is inherently valuable, and the inconsideration of sentient beings is inherently wrong. That is essentially what I'm going to be arguing when I say that veganism is an ethical obligation. An obligation is a duty or a responsibility. And I'm arguing from a Hegelian position, something that I know that has, at least tacitly, endorses, at least from what I've seen, he endorses. So hopefully we can make some headway there. So, all conscious beings have interests, desires, and the capacity to feel pain and pleasure. When we are considering conscious beings and conscious interests, we are considering what is the foundation of value and ethics as a whole. If we are to agree with the Hegelian position, then what we are understanding is that there is a right and a wrong entailed in the world itself. It's objective. It's not determined by you or me or any given party. It is something which is right and that we can discover that it is right and then make it a law, make it a rule. I would say that we have already done such a thing. We already have laws, numerous laws, which protect the rights, the life and liberty of individuals within the state and usually humans. Of course, this wasn't always the case. The law used to protect classes of individuals particularly, and even still is inadequate in many cases to protect the overall interests of the general population, even humans, not just animals. Veganism is this consideration. Veganism is the consideration that animals are not being respected and treated equally in the eyes of the law, as in their interests, their desires, and their preferences are not being met with reasonable consideration. We aren't considering that the pain of an animal having its throat slit is not justified because we wish to eat them, because we wish to overpower them. We are considering ourselves more valuable simply based on an identity which we have constructed rather than something which is true by nature. If we were to be honest with ourselves and we were to be honest with the reality that we are spawned from, the unnecessary suffering of any conscious being defies what we are trying to do in ethics.
Man, take a look at that, man. The guy is doing that thing with his arms, the Has guy.
Yeah. As does that. He's a clown.
What the actual fuck, dude? Who are these dudes, man? Okay, go on.
Consciousness and subjectivity to the greatest overall possible degree, to create principles which genuinely reflect the interests and value that we can see.
One moment, I'm sorry, Lewis. Infrared, please no burgers in my window. Thank you. Keep going. You have 30 more seconds.
So when we consider animals and we consider their interests and their pain and their suffering, what we are doing is the same thing that we've done for hundreds of years. We are considering that the values that we hold today or have held in the past do not encompass the conscious interests of individuals throughout society. That, for example, black people are not lesser, that women are not lesser, and now animals are not lesser just because of the identities that we have perpetuated upon them. And so when we consider the conscious interests of other sentient beings, we are being more ethical, more rational, and essentially doing the right thing. So I hope that explains my position.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, so
it's like
notice
why he's. I mean, I get it is a reasonable from the point of view of the understanding. It is a reasonable position to have. There is an hierarchy. Consciousness is superior to unconsciousness, and our social institutions and our practices should reflect the the absolute value of life and consciousness, our sentience, right? So we should not be killing animals because animals are sentient. That's the point, right? And sentience is an absolute value, which
Mm-hmm.
commands absolute respect.
Mm-hmm.
I find I find a bit offensive when he puts the animals as particularly beside women and black people. You know what I mean?
I was gonna mention that. I mean,
It's the kind of bad move, you know, like oh, so you are anti-racist, so you should be too vegan. Oh, come on, man,
yeah.
that's
I've heard worse, by the way. I had a Shilingian who told me that our cutting down trees is the same as, the mass murder near genocide by the Belgians in
yeah,
the
this
Congo.
is yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so
What
these views,
I think
God,
what I think it's very important in this whole debate is the problem of value, right? So, what is the criteria of value? In this case, what is to be food, right? And so there must be a certain criteria, absolute criteria through which we choose between what we kill for food or not, right? This is the main point here. And his point is that as he tries to equalize human beings and animals, right? So they all belong to one and same category, which are the sentient beings. But
yeah,
he opposes the sentient to the non-sentient. And I think that's the problem that I see in all those guys with those like or horizontal ontologies, right? In which everything is equalized. There is no such a thing as progression, hierarchy. So everything has the same value of everything. So he tries to do that within the category of sentient beings, but he does not extend that to non-sentient. You know what I mean? So what keeps me from going further and saying that maybe mechanical beings have rights? You know what I mean? And they should be treated this or that way. I don't know.
well, I mean, you're just basically bringing up something that anybody can point out, which, what is the validity of his categories, right? He's kind of just pulled them out of nowhere. I mean, this is to be expected in a debate, so that's not really too much of an issue. Like
Yeah,
even if I were
yeah,
to debate him, like my positions would come out as presumptuous because that's just the necessities of that kind of
yeah, yeah,
situation. But I just wanted to bring out, particularly the critique of the Hegelian stuff. So remember, Hegel says rights originate in the will, and he made no fuss about it. Animals have no will. The reason they have no will is they cannot think, they have no I, therefore they can make no they can neither think nor can they make any rational claims to us in any communicable language. So, they're
yeah,
brutes, they're dumb. And perspective philosophy claims that he has a Hegelian position, but notice the difference. He does not begin with the will. He begins with just consciousness. He says animals are inherently valuable. 2, consciousness is inherently valuable. 3, the inconsideration of sentient beings is inherently wrong. And 4, therefore you should be a vegan.
yeah. I think we could do make some further exploration of the idea of will, right? So
Right,
will
but he
will sorry, please.
yeah, I was just gonna say, but he has no concept of will. He takes right to just go straight from consciousness, which is, at least if you're claiming to be Hegelian, I've already shown that that's wrong. You can't do that. That's not where it begins.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we need further explanations of will, right? Will takes itself to be universal, right? And as a universal, will is supposedly infinite, right? So will, in its indeterminacy, in its abstractness, it is infinite. It is the universal, right? That's why human beings are able to talk about will in general. Animals don't have that capacity of positing before themselves will as abstract will. Animals have will, but they have a will, a natural will, in which its will is always attached to something external, which is limited. And that has a reflection even in their bodies, because most animals, they have a very, very, very specific way of eating. They It's not like a human being which can eat a whole lot of things, right? Animals, they have limitations. This particularity in their own bodies, expressed in their own bodies, the particularity of animals' will. So it's not only about willing, I think. It's about understanding will in its abstraction, in its pure void, as simply will. Will of what? Will, taken as itself, right? Um, this is a very important point to make. If someone says, "Oh, but animals, they do have will. The monkey wants a banana." Yes, but he have never established institutions in which will is considered in its abstraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to say something, Antonio? I don't know.
Yeah, just to add on that, there's the whole thing, like Hegel mentions, that the way the will functions is that one represents to oneself a goal, but the full will, I mean, obviously, an animal is hungry. We don't know whether it even represents an image of like, oh, I'm hungry, I want kibble or I want a banana or whatever.
Yeah,
And then it
yeah,
goes and decides. Usually what it happens is an animal just, is suddenly hungry and it goes eat whatever there is. It seems to be no particular preference whatsoever besides, what it can naturally eat, and it's capable of digesting. But
yeah,
a human being has like, oh, I'm hungry. What do I want? Do I feel like
yeah,
having a burger? No, maybe some pizza. And you
yeah,
represent to yourself all these choices. Then you pick one out, and even then, you still have further reasons. You're like, no, I don't think I should eat that. It's not really healthy. You have these higher and higher echelons of more and more abstract
yeah,
conditions for your purposes.
yeah,
Hegel, for example, gives the example later in that section, a few sections down, that the first genuine object of willing is happiness. Because there is no such thing as happiness in the world. This is a pure product of cognition. It's a pure product of
mhm,
thought. There's enjoyment. There's pleasure. In the sensuous world, but there is no happiness. Happiness is an pure abstraction from all joy and of all pleasure, which is this
yeah,
thing that does not actually exist for the senses.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Uh,
It's
so,
it's happiness is joy thinking by itself, right? As a universal. That's the point here. Human beings are capable of the universal. Um, every and each mental procedure we make is have this 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 universality as its base, right? Anything that we put into language or think or posit to ourselves, it cannot simply be a singular, a pure singular, right? It comes into a certain kind of universality, and apart from that, I think there's also what will does, right? Will is also explicitly opposed to something outside of it, and in that, will is limited, is finite. So we have a clear contradiction here with um, will is the universal, will is free, right? It's free of determinations. Will is for itself, but at the same time, will is limited as subjective against nature, an objective realm, right?
mhm.
Um,
But it
how
also is a very
will
overcoming of that division.
what? I don't understand.
It's also the overcoming of that division, though, because it's in will that you posit first the distinction between the objective world and the subjective. But the will
Yeah,
is already the movement from the subjective into the objective.
yeah, yeah. So what will does? So will try to realize itself to make itself objective. What does that mean? That means that will try to externalize its content, to not be simply something which is within itself, something subjective, internal, essential, let's say. It tries to put forth its content, right? And for that, it acts on the world. It is a source of determination of the world, right? When we try to realize a certain project, for example, what we are doing, we are changing the world so as to, to identify the world or the circumstance with our plan, our ideal, right? So, and there are a lot of ways in which you can do that, and one of them is property. You
Right,
appropriate the
right.
world.
So that's let me interject there for a little bit. That's already getting to like what the full determination of the will. Like that's what the full free will is, where the will is able to determine itself as will. Uh, and this is kind of a cheeky thing. The first form of that is yes, the rational will, in that it's the self comprehension of the will as its own concept. But the objectified form of this, the actualized form, is a living will facing another living will, who both already have this rational will and recognize each other and recognize that their very being requires this objective communal space in forms of norms, which are not merely contractual, but are recognized as necessities for the actual existence of the will to begin with. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
therefore, that's why we have property, because there ought to be a place in the world that is mine. That is why my body is my property, because no one else should be able to own me. Otherwise, I would be a
yeah,
slave and an object to someone else, and I would not be a subject or a will. Therefore,
yeah,
we get other things like laws, that I should not be subject to arbitrary communal rules. They should be stable and I should know them. Therefore, we have also
yeah,
things like the right of education. I should be given the necessary conditions and actualizations for my very developing of a will in the first place, which is why we need education, and so on
mhm,
and so on. Animals cannot do this. Animals simply not only do that, they do not do this, they cannot do this. Uh, if they did, they would not be animals. They would not be humans, but they would be spirits, which is, in a way, is like basically saying a human, but in the form of some other kind of body.
yeah.
So,
Not human in its naturalistic sense. We're talking about who thinks and who do not think.
yeah. So, I mean, let's go back to his argument. So he says, point one, animals are inherently valuable. This is nonsense. And from the
I
Hegelian
think he
perspective, this is
says
nonsense.
animals are valuable because they are conscious. That's the
No, but
I think just
the way he framed it first, he first said, point one, animals are inherently valuable. Two, consciousness is inherently valuable. Because animals are
two.
not inherently conscious, by the way. Not in the Hegelian concept. An animal is what could be called an organism. I mean, this goes back to the ancient origin of the word, where animal just means that which is animated.
Yeah, yeah,
So you can have an animated body that is not necessarily conscious. Uh, so to say the animal is inherently valuable is foolish, because value does not arise at animals. It's after the animals exist. So, animal bodies in themselves, microbes and such things, do not have any value whatsoever. Uh, Insofar as value arises, it arises in consciousness. It is not that consciousness is valuable as such, not yet, not merely because it's conscious. Rather, it is consciousness that has value and posits value to begin with. Obviously, once posited, a consciousness holds itself to be valuable, but only in it as a self-consciousness, um, and only implicitly at first. if it's not self-conscious, then it's only implicitly valuable to itself, because it does not have an I. It does not think of itself, oh, I am valuable, therefore this and that. Animals do not do this. So consciousness does not hold itself to be valuable. It feels itself valuable because it acts to preserve itself. It acts to satisfy its desires, but it does not hold itself as a value as such. It only acts under the determination of value. Because consciousness is the one where desires arise, and its value is for desire. Value is, the satisfaction of desire. So, there's the appetites, there's the feelings, drives, whatever you want to call them. Those are where value arises. For social animals, other animals are valuable. Particularly as these living entities, not merely as a consciousness, but as a total living thing. Dogs like other animals. They like hanging out with other dogs. And if they grow up with other animals, they like hanging out with other animals. They like hanging out with us as humans. They don't look at us and go like, oh, there's a consciousness. I like that. They just intuit these things. They're not aware of them. So to say consciousness is inherently valuable is not really proper. The only consciousness for which there is an inherent value of itself and of other consciousness as such is a social consciousness, which is a self-consciousness. Below that, other things are valuable, but not consciousness as such. Not even for itself, and definitely not with other beings.
It's important to say, I think, that self-consciousness is not equal to being aware. You know what I mean? Like, many people think self-conscious that way, and at least in Hegelian terms, self-consciousness is consciousness which explicitly takes itself as an object of itself, right?
Yeah.
So,
and this does not have to be conceptually recognized. Children recognize, babies recognize this.
Because I don't know if what's a perspective philosophy, I don't know with what kind of concept of consciousness he is operating here, because consciousness in Hegel is a concept which appears in the beginning of the phenomenology of spirit, and it designates a certain logical form in which there is an opposition, right, between an I and another of itself, and between knowing and its object, and this opposition takes a lot of forms, right? Between master and slave, etc., etc., etc. So I don't know if he's taking consciousness in its minimal form, such as Hegel understands the concept, which is exactly this division, this opposition between knowing and known. Okay. But I think he is taking consciousness here more in the sense of awareness, sentiment, self-sentiment. I don't know, so it's very difficult to consider his arguments because I don't know with what kind of I think it's very clear that this has nothing to do with Hegel. At least I don't know.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. This is a typical utilitarian argument. It's not Hegelian at all.
And it's because, for example, there is another important thing, like a thing can only be appropriated if it not belongs to itself. And for everybody who knows Hegel, the idea of self-relationship is a very important idea, which is it's a certain logical structure which is present since the beginning, right, in logic, when there is the first negation of the negation. So there is self-relation indifference, right, explicitly posed. So I don't think he is actually much Hegelian, but well, let's see his arguments. But this has nothing to do with Hegel.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Hegel. It's basically what I wanted to point out.
I don't know why use his name. Like, I am a Hegelian. What is Hegelian about what he's saying? I can see nothing yet.
We're going to skip Haz's response. All I'm going to say is Haz was right in this debate. Haz pointed out this thing that animals have no rights. He brought up the quotes from Hegel. But let's see what his response is.
And are you wrapping up?
Yeah.
All right, that was pretty fast. Okay, so Haz, let me reset the clock here. And you have 8 minutes for your opening statement, starting now.
Wait, what? Damn.
We're 8 minutes. He said for his response. Yeah. The guy is shaped, motherfucker. He's whoa.
He's ripped. Sorry,
He's ripped, man.
In this debate, the main thesis I will defend is that Lewis, or perspective philosophy, plainly shows that Hegel defends constitutional monarchy as the site of a truly actualized freedom. An animal cannot have rights and is qualitatively different from a human being. One could not be a consistent Hegelian without acknowledging as much.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Man said it.
All right,
I
so
agree.
perspective philosophy, you're going to have 5 minutes to reply. Starting now.
So that was actually really interesting. I was actually surprised, to be entirely honest with that, you actually know that much about Hegel. That was pretty decent. I mean, you're absolutely wrong about the idea of the Cartesian subject being the Hegelian
So
subject.
what's up with
That's
you guys? How are
entirely
you?
wrong.
We're recording.
And I think thinkers like
I linked
Zizek and Lacan would exemplify why that would not be the case. In fact, the Cartesian subject implies some sort of inherent knowledge, an inherent self-understanding, which is absolutely absent within the Hegelian dialectic. In fact, self-understanding is the middle term, whilst the first term is consciousness. So, no, you're wrong about that. But otherwise, that was actually pretty decent. I am not actually arguing for veganism ex nihilo. I'm not arguing it from an abstraction that we are dismissing all of the ethics that has come before us. In fact, I see it as a rational development of the concept of equality that we have arrived to this place, and that's how I introduced my opening argument. I said that essentially we no longer consider other ethnicities, we no longer consider other genders as being lesser or weaker than us. Hegel did actually see animals as lesser. Hegel did, but Hegel was alive 200 something years ago, and really his ethics are, under his own system, outdated. He understood that ethics was a progressive system that was developing, and his understanding of animals was also underdeveloped, as his position on women. He thought women were lesser and inferior, just as he thinks that animals are lesser and inferior. And he also thought animals couldn't kill themselves. We know better now. So even in terms of raw psychological terms, we know that Hegel's philosophy did not capture the essence of an animal, which is unsurprising because it was 300 years out of date. Now, when we consider that, the concept of mutual recognition. Mutual recognition does not allow for the establishment of what is ethically right, but more the investigation of what is ethically right. Mutual recognition allows for the establishment of self-consciousness, which is the middle term in the Hegelian dialectic, which is infinite. The development of self-consciousness allows for the development of absolute spirit, which allows the individual to reconcile themselves with themselves. So you say, who am I considering when I'm considering the animal? I'm considering myself, because there is only the self understanding the self, whether that includes objects which are absent and nihilistic in themselves and being determinate, are ultimately unified in what is the self. So even if I was considering an animal as in its consciousness, even without its self-consciousness, I'm considering me, because we are all united in spirit. That's the entire point. The consideration of consciousness itself does not need to recognize an individual's self-consciousness for them to have value. Children do not have self-consciousness. Babies, like before the mirror stage, and they are valuable. And so are disabled people. They have experiences which are inherently valuable, which we become conscious of.
He's running through a lot of points, so we're gonna back it up a bit.
The first point
And he also thought
about
animals.
Yeah, go ahead.
where he's talking about, he's comparing Hegel's lack of incorporation of animals into his system, comparing it to racism or Hegel's
Women.
outdated views on women. It's very telling.
Oh yeah,
I
we
just
already
have to say, I see this-
mentioned that.
Okay.
We already mentioned he compared it to black people as well.
Yeah, he's always
Jesus.
pandering. to that. He always pandering to that. What he's trying to say is that if you are not vegan, you are a horrible person. That's
Well,
that's
look,
that's
let's
basically
go point by point where he said, okay, he began with, he says that his real argument is that veganism is a development of the concept of equality.
yeah,
First
but
off, Hegel doesn't give a fuck about equality. Hegel is not for
yeah,
equality. Hegel is someone who believes that there is inequality, that there is hierarchy, and he proves it. So this whole point about equality is non-Hegelian. I know where he's getting this from. It's from his utilitarian views. Because I see that he had an interview with famous animal lover Peter Singer, and emphasis on lover.
Yeah.
Because Peter Singer argued that bestiality is a-okay.
of course, he's being like coherent, you know.
Yeah. Second,
Well, we can't
uh,
speak on to whether he actually does it, but
Okay, no one's saying that. No one's saying that. But it's funny. Like, it's
but if
funny.
he did,
For me, it's
according to
funny.
him, what's wrong with it?
yeah.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
So long as the animal clearly likes it and gives tacit consent, so be it.
Oh, but animals do consent now. Give consent now. Okay.
Doesn't he argue for post-birth abortion too, though?
Yeah, I mean, like Peter Singer's like a what would you call it? Not a joke, but I forget the word right now. It's like somebody's a cardboard cutout of the worst things that people believe about modern society and about anti-humanism, and yeah, that's Peter Singer.
Well, but I find it weird that someone would advocate for that, like not recognizing the humanity of a newborn child, but recognize like animal rights. Seems weird to me.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure he's down to also abort animal babies. I doubt he's going to take much offense at that. So anyways, all right, so the equality thing, that's un-Hegelian as fuck. Two, he says Hegel's views of animals are wrong and outdated. No. Simple as that. He mentions that Hegel thought animals could not kill themselves. Hegel says that animals cannot commit suicide. Suicide is not just killing yourself.
Just a point here. Like, it's important to point out that the concept of animal in Hegel, it's not, or it's supposedly not derived from abstractions, from actual existing beings. You know what I mean? It's a speculative concept for Hegel. Animality. Okay, this is important, and is so you cannot expect to find a completely clear overlap between what science or empirical biology says an animal is and what Hegel is talking about when he's talking about an animal, right? Because
Right.
for Hegel, animal is actually a logical concept, a certain logic. It's not a matter of going around and abstracting certain properties for certain beings and
Or
classifying them
making them
into
up, which is what science does.
or something like that. So I
Because
don't think
yeah.
he's up. I don't think he knows that there is a whole chapter in the philosophy of nature about animals and plants, right?
Yeah. And I
So
mean, he's also completely ignoring that it's not the case that we learn what animals are just because, we look out there and you look at a nice furry squirrel and you're like,
yeah, we
this is
have
an animal. In all of that, there is a completely subjective determination about you as a scientist. No matter how much you want to pretend I am unbiased, you are choosing the categories to pick out as to what you think is relevant to animal being and what you project on animal being.
Yeah.
The way Hegel develops categories is not this way. Hegel is developing the world, constructing it from nothing. And as each thing reaches a certain level, it reaches a certain structure, something that matches close enough to something we already know in our everyday lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then he says,
exactly.
okay,
So
here is where this name for a category fits. So we arrive at something like, the process of, the minerals world, transforming itself, reproducing itself, such a thing starts looking a lot like what we call organisms, and that's where the organism arises, and all these other things. So that's how the buildup happens. You cannot point
yeah.
at so-called empirical science and go like, oh, but this proves Hegel wrong. No, it doesn't. And I guarantee you that if you actually look at these so-called studies, you will find a lot of subjective bullshit where people just pull categories out of their ass, where they pull out, I think this is here. Here's my hypothesis. I believe this, and this is what I see, and it seems to confirm it. That's not what philosophical categories are like. There is no such thing as an animal in the world, in the sense of you somehow intuit or absorb categories. You don't. Categories originate with your system of meaning and thinking. People came up with the concept of animals to specify something in relationship to what they already knew, and how they are constructing the world within their own minds. You don't look at animals and just intuit the category of animals. You have to construct it rationally. You can pretend that you can do it badly, and you can pretend that you don't. But that is how categories originate. Insofar as animals are animals, they are what Hegel says. They are things, they are beings that are alive. They are self-moving, they are self-reproducing, they have the whole metabolic process. They feed, they excrete, all these other things, whether they're plant, and if they're plants, they do it in a certain way. They're not animals. If they're animals, they move. That's why they call them animals. It always says. If you had an animal that did not, or that had something more like self-consciousness, it would not be an animal. Just because it doesn't look human doesn't mean that it's an animal. If it just looked like a fucking hairy monkey, but it walks,
Like,
but it speaks, it would be
yeah.
a spirit, not an animal.
Animals, like, just to point this out, in the encyclopedia, the animal is a threshold of spirit, of passing into a spirit. Before animals, there are plants, right? So Hegel has a whole lot of talk about the vegetable nature, the animal organism. He makes some interesting pointing out about this. So if anybody wants to know what Hegel understands as an animal, go to the encyclopedia in organic physics. There's also a very interesting talk about the geological nature, right? What is before, what is in a certain sense, the condition of emergence of individuals which are alive, right? So that's it.
Yeah.
My
It's details that
only
we can't
issue.
really get into.
What?
Yeah, go ahead.
What?
It's like detail that we don't need to get into because it goes to a depth that this guy has never even gone to himself. So it just kind of
Yeah, he
pointless.
could go. He could go and research actually what Hegel understands as animal and nature and stuff.
Hey,
Because
well,
for Hegel, nature is self externality. So the problem for Hegel here is like animals are not for themselves. If they're not for themselves, they're not free, because freedom in Hegel has a very intimate connection with self-relation. Right? Freedom is not about uh, a line which goes to infinity, but a line which comes back to itself. Right? True subjectivity, which comes back to itself through objectivity. Right?
Right.
So I think he would have a lot of good opportunities to talk about veganism within Hegel's philosophy, because I don't think Hegel's philosophy is completely repulsive to the idea of respecting nature, right? It is
No,
actually
it's not.
huge attempt to harmonize ourselves with nature. Spirit is the coming back of the idea to a self through nature, right? So
Yeah. I
uh,
mean, look. Like, if you wanted to make that kind of argument, the best place to go is go to early Hegel. Go to like the spirit of Christianity and its fate. There you will that one, and what is the other one on the positivity of Christian religion.
the spirit.
There,
No,
there
it's
you will
like
find.
there are two books: the positivity of Christian religion and the spirit of Judaism,
Do you
or the
think
And
spirit of Christianity. The
and
spirit
its
of
fate.
Christianity. Yeah.
that
Yeah. All I'm
essay
saying.
with the like authorship that's kind of ambiguous, but the one about the system, the first
Yeah,
German
the first
idealist system?
draft, the fragment of the German idealist system. That too. You will find in those a Hegel that loves nature. The reason the
Yeah.
later Hegel does not show that kind of love to nature is mostly because of many. There are many things that he does for the reasons that at his time he thought people were losing a bit too much of the proper distinction, and he wanted to correct that. So he shits
Yeah.
on nature a lot more in the later mature system to correct this misunderstanding. But it is inherent to his system that there must be a reconciliation with nature, where we are not masters, we are not lords of nature, but we live in
Exactly.
harmony with it.
That's an important part. That's important part. In the spirit of Christianity, he begins by giving some
Actually, no.
logical
Let's not get into
model.
it. Let's not get into it. I don't want to get into that. I want to keep going with the video.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
That's going into too many tangents. I do want to. He did come up with saying about. He said like animals cannot kill themselves, and I mentioned to you this is about suicide. Killing yourself is not the same thing as suicide, or killing yourself accidentally, or even. Here's what Hegel says: In this element of the will is rooted my ability to free myself from everything, abandon every aim, abstract from everything. The human being alone can sacrifice everything, his life included. He can commit suicide. An animal cannot. It always remains merely negative in an alien determination to which it merely accustoms itself. The reason the human being alone can commit suicide is because to commit suicide is to abstract yourself from all your situations, put yourself in a relationship of what do I think the purpose and point of my life is now. And you can take that whole abstraction of the world and you and make a judgment about the value of that and say, you know what, it's not worth it anymore. And you end your life because of that rational judgment, which, ultimately, no, suicide is never rational, truly, but there is a way to will your own end, the end of your life. But that is not what even if an animal killed themselves. Now there are stories in which people talk about it where like animals, their friend dies or whatever, and they were really close, and they just lose, let's call it the will to live, uh, and they just go crawl off, into a little cave or under the house and disappear, and they die. This is not suicide. Because the animal does not have a complete abstraction from the world in which they make a rational judgment that the world as such, in the cognition of what we mean by the world and what the value of the world is, no longer has, the value that we thought it did. And so we step back and you decide, well, it's not worth it anymore. An animal does not do that. Just because you feel like the feeling of life not flowing through you anymore, unhappiness, just general, torpor of feeling, is not suicide. The loss of the will to live is not itself suicide. So, all right, let's keep going.
Is to become aware of the value which pre-exists self-consciousness. Now, when we consider that, the concept of mutual recognition. Mutual recognition, that would not be the case. In fact, the Cartesian subject implies some sort of inherent knowledge.
So I don't know what this Cartesian subject thing is, but it doesn't matter.
An inherent self-understanding, which is absolutely absent within the Hegelian dialectic. In fact, self-understanding is the middle term, whilst the first term is consciousness. So, no, you're wrong about that. But otherwise, that was actually pretty decent. I am not actually arguing for veganism ex nihilo. I'm not arguing it from an abstraction that we are dismissing all of the ethics that has come before us. In fact, I see it as a rational development of the concept of equality that we have arrived to this place, and that's how I introduced my opening argument. I said that essentially we no longer consider other ethnicities, we no longer consider other genders as being lesser or weaker than us. Hegel did actually see animals as lesser. Hegel did, but Hegel was alive 200 something years ago, and really his ethics are, under his own system, outdated. He understood that ethics was a progressive system that was developing, and his...
Just to point out, because we didn't point out yet, the reason black slaves in America gained the recognition that they ought to be free is because guess why? They kept fucking struggling for it and telling us that. The reason women got rights in the modern world is because they kept fucking telling us that, and they kept struggling for it. The reason animals have no rights is because they're not telling us that they're free, and they're certainly not struggling for it. You know, trying to struggle out of a cage is not telling me that, let me out, I'm a human being, I have rights, you know, we can communicate, you know, we can come to an understanding. That's not what it means. And sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Josh.
No, I just said that's totally true. That's a really great point. And it really shows a very just paternalistic attitude towards stuff like the end of slavery or women gaining rights.
Yeah, it's as if we just randomly learned.
It's
as if we randomly
decided to bestow that upon the black slaves, or men just decided to do that for women.
Yeah, you know, we just came to like, wow, women are conscious, and you know, black slaves, they're conscious too. Man, consciousness, it's valuable. It's wrong. Let's give them rights. People had to die to get rights. Even for women's rights, people had to die.
Struggle for recognition. Good old team in Hegelian philosophy, right? Rights. They are the result of struggle. They do not come to existence spontaneously without effort. There is an effort related to.
You have to prove.
And they come through a reciprocal relationship, which is the whole point, of course.
Yeah, you know, like
we have an actual relationship with women and other ethnicities.
The fact is that you cannot, like, for Hegel, this thing is very clear. Like, right implies a reasonable person, an individual which has reason, right? Animals do not have reason, so animals cannot have rights. But I would like to again say that doesn't mean that we don't give a fuck about nature, we don't give a fuck about animal suffering, you know what I mean? So I don't think that's, but certainly I think it's bad, it's even bad to discuss nature in terms of right, because nature has no way of fighting for its own rights.
Well, respecting them. Nature doesn't respect rights. You know, nature doesn't respect, oh, that's John's property over there. Can't send a flood right there. Fuck it.
Animals cannot have duties. How can animals have rights? It's important because people usually try to think the rights completely abstracted from duty. But duty are rights. Rights are duty. You cannot expect to have something without another. Like when you say, when someone says you shall not kill, it is also saying that you are not going to be killed. You know, so every right has a duty, and animals cannot be responsibilized. Like if my dog kills a child, it's my responsibility, not the dog's responsibility. You know. So if we go as far as he's saying with this idea of animals having rights, animals would have rights to property too. Animals would have rights to vote. I don't know. Like, I think.
Well, no, I mean, that just gets into silly stuff. Like, here's something I want to bring up about the thing about struggle. In the phenomenology of spirit itself, Hegel mentions it. He says, like, the individual who has not risked his life may well be recognized as a person, but it has not attained to the truth of this recognition as recognition of an independent self-consciousness. If somebody gives you a right and you didn't fight for it, you haven't proved that you actually have it or deserve it. You need to struggle. You need to put your life on the line for these things to prove that they are really what belongs to you, because you are the one who is demanding it and proving the necessity of it. Animals do not do this.
Yeah. One question I have that's related to the whole idea of reciprocity in rights, and maybe bringing a little bit back to the discussion about spirit. Is language a prerequisite for spirit?
Language arises with spirit. Later on, Hegel says in the phenomenology that language is the sensuous existence of spirit. So it's not that first there's language, then there's spirit. Language is the presence of spirit to spirit itself.
But it's like a necessary part of spirit.
Well, right. I mean, like language is just communication. Universal
it's the transmitting
communication
of ideas.
Yeah, it's the universal communication of thought. Animals communicate, but they don't have language because they don't communicate universals. They communicate particulars. They signal particulars, but they don't communicate universals. Language does communicate the universals. Which is why we can have translation across languages, and we can comprehend, Chinese and French and ancient languages like Sumerian perfectly fine. Because once we understand the links.
Gorilla?
A hoax. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who already make a pretty good case that a lot of the so-called things she's communicating are. She could not sign perfectly. She was not very good at maintaining signs, so there was a lot of interpretation going on by her handlers about what she meant. The whole sentence thing, she was not very good at sentences. And like I said, the proof of language, the proof of thought, is the capacity to pick up a universal symbolic order and translate it into anyone pretty quickly. With your dog, you can teach your dog, there's some border collie that can memorize 600 different toys and commands by names. That's not language. That's pretty good memory for an animal, but that's not language. It's not, you can't then go and in one go translate this thing I call a dinosaur. I'm now going to just tell you dinosaur now is, some whistle or something. And that the dog immediately would then, in that purely symbolic relation, understand that you're talking about the particular, which that other, the name dinosaur symbolizes. They can't do that. You have to retrain them on the particular again. So anyways, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Understanding of animals was also underdeveloped, as his position on women. He thought women were lesser and inferior, just as he thinks that animals are lesser and inferior. And he also thought animals couldn't kill themselves. We know better now. So even in terms of raw psychological terms, we know that Hegel's philosophy did not capture the essence of an animal, which is unsurprising because it was 300 years out of date. Now,
nope.
When we consider that, the concept of mutual recognition. Mutual recognition does not allow for the establishment of what is ethically right, but more the investigation of what is ethically right. Mutual recognition.
Yeah, no.
Self-conscious was already established in desire.
Yeah,
Like mutual recognition is.
So he's right about this, that mutual
something.
recognition isn't where right is established. Right is established in will, which is quite a bit later than self-consciousness.
Yeah.
Allows for the establishment of self-consciousness, which is the middle term in the Hegelian dialectic, which is infinite. The development of self-consciousness allows for the development of absolute spirit, which allows the individual to reconcile themselves with themselves. So you say, who am I considering when I'm considering the animal? I'm considering myself, because there is only the self understanding the self, whether that includes objects which are absent and nihilistic in themselves and being determinate, are ultimately unified in what is the self. So even if I was considering an animal as in its consciousness, even without its self-consciousness, I'm considering me, because we are all united in spirit. That's the entire point. The consideration...
I don't even know what his point with that was. So, everything is the recognition of spirit by spirit, and, he's like, well, I can consider the animal even without self-consciousness, and I'm still considering myself. Okay, what's that supposed to mean? No. I don't know what that has to do with his argument.
Of conscious does not need to recognize an individual's self-consciousness for them to have value. Children do not.
This, again, he did not establish value earlier, but you can't make arguments of value here with establishing specifically what value.
Yep.
The value of humans is freedom. The value of everything is freedom. But the specific value of humans is freedom as such, whereas no other thing has that. The reason a baby has a value that an animal, baby doesn't, is that a baby is of a different kind. Hegel is very much an Aristotelian in this way. If you care about Aristotle, which most people don't know, and I will admit to you, I don't know very much about Aristotle, so don't come at me, Aristotelians. I'm just saying. Just name dropping like everybody does. The point is, there's a difference in kind. So the human baby is what is going to become spirit. And is already spirit in that it is becoming spirit already. A baby pretty quickly starts picking things up and, joining the human established community.
Yeah, it's potential. Let's say it's spirit in itself. It's individual spirit in itself.
Right, which is already in the actualization phase of becoming for itself. So it's not merely potential.
Yeah.
It is always already becoming towards itself. Whereas no animal will ever become a human being in the sense of having thought or consciousness, self-consciousness, and universal cognition. So, that's the difference. That's why animals do not have the value that humans have. And also for people who are, mentally handicapped, let's say, to use the politically correct term, or, lacking in human cognitive capacities. These people still have rights in the fact that they are part of the recognized human community. We recognize that such people are somebody's son or daughter. We recognize that such people are part of the human community. Therefore, we give them minimal rights. Even if they don't understand those rights, we recognize them as blood of our blood, flesh of our flesh. Even if they are incomplete, but they are still of our kind. They are not a dog, they are not a turtle, they are not a germ, they are not a plant. They are a human being, an incomplete human being, but a human being nonetheless. Kinds matter. Anybody got anything to add to that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
not have self-consciousness. Babies, like before the mirror stage, and they are valuable. And so are disabled people. They have experiences which are inherently valuable, which we become conscious of. The whole point of self-consciousness is to become aware of the value which pre-exists self-consciousness, and construct an identity which allows for authenticity and freedom, which is the entire point of the Hegelian dialectic. Hegel's dialectic is 300 years out of date. We have now reached a point in which the concept of equality has developed past where Hegel was at that time. The Cartesian subject in this respect is...
Again,
Man,
equality has nothing to do
he
with
has
Hegel.
no idea, right, guys?
Yeah.
He has no. Oh man, he's completely clueless about the. Like, I'm not saying that he's wrong, guys.
I'm
Attention
saying
here.
he's
I
wrong.
think he's
I will
wrong.
say that.
Yeah, no. But wait. I want to make a distinction here. Like, my problem here is that for anybody who have actually read Hegel, we know, like, for certain that this guy is not doing a Hegelian debate. That's my point here. Like, for me, it doesn't matter if he's right or wrong. I think what we are seeing here is if the fact that he calls himself a Hegelian has an import or not. And until this moment, he's speaking as someone who never heard about Hegel, but through some Lacanian bullshit. I think that's the point here, because this idea of the Cartesian subject and this idea
Yeah.
of the mirror stage, these are all like discussions among the French psychoanalysis and stuff like that. So I don't think this guy have ever read Hegel in his life, truly.
That's what I think when I listen to this guy.
That's that's
Now
and like, I'm not talking directly about if he's right or wrong. I'm really talking like why he is trying to appear as if he is making a debate with Hegel. He's not. He's not. He's out there somewhere, which I don't know. I think it's a bit of psychoanalysis in there, but this has nothing to do about Hegel. Like, you know, um, he speaks as if he didn't know Hegel at all. Not even through introductions, let's say. He has the idea of these dialectics, like as if dialectics is this most important element term in Hegelian philosophy, which is not. You know, there there are a lot of other important, let's say, contents to be thought in Hegel. I don't know, guys. I think the problem here is not. His argumentation is very confusing. Like, he's always presupposing that which he needs to prove, which is very un-Hegelian of his part.
no, yeah, okay. Like part of why I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning. Part of why I want to make this video is to show people why he offered to debate me on the animal rights video I put out. I refused because of this. Because the argument is going to devolve into a he said, she said argument about Hegel. Because he claims to be Hegelian, and obviously I claim to be coming from a Hegelian perspective as well. And I did have a somewhat debate with him years ago when I first published my piece on Epoche, The Magnanimity of Spirit. I saw his channel and he claimed to be Hegelian. I'm like, hell, I published a piece on what I think is an actual Hegelian view on animal rights as opposed to yours, and he didn't look at it. He just started quote mining things at me about consciousness, which he did not understand. Which he, by the way, he ended up deleting that whole thread, so I can't show you. And I just consider this guy to be a few things. Dishonest, intellectually dishonest. I mean, this guy's a PhD student, which, let me tell you, you all know that I don't respect academia as it is. They hand out PhDs like candy. Anybody who's willing to slave for one is going to get one. So I'm not impressed by that. He's not a scholar. He's never written any scholarly. He spends his time debating with idiots, which is, you ought to curate the things that you do. If you spend time around idiots, you're bound to become an idiot yourself, and this has shown to be true in every person that I've observed coming to this kind of sphere of debates. So I don't want to waste my time arguing with somebody about Hegel who's not going to accept or comprehend the kind of critiques that I'm going to bring. Because when I argued with him, I also brought with me, textual references and arguments. And I told him at the end, I'm like, look, the only way we're going to get out of this trap of he said, she said is you're going to have to prove to me that you can develop this kind of argument in Hegelian style, which is a conceptual derivation. And I know he can't do it. Now, certainly in my paper, The Magnanimity of Spirit, I don't fully do it, but I show the kind of pathway you can follow to analogically get to it pretty quickly. So, I know that in that paper, it's not a foolproof argument. It's more of a very strong hint at what the argument would be. But on the stuff of just the basis of right, that's no question, 100% easy to prove. It's easy to prove that he has no clue what he's talking about. He keeps appealing to consciousness, the value of consciousness, and the value of this and that. He's only now mentioned the value of freedom, but it's not clear to me that he understands that freedom is the value. And that precisely in the degree of freedom is a degree of value. And particularly with morality, Hegel grounds morality and ethics on right, not right on morality and ethics.
Yep.
So if you don't have rights, guess what you also don't have? You don't get moral consideration, you don't get ethical consideration.
For example, like a good example of it is like, for example, when an animal does bad to someone, we do not think in terms of intent, right? We do not give animals the right to be judged also by their intent, not only by the outcome of their actions, right?
Yeah,
To actually give animal rights, it would be catastrophic. It wouldn't work because it's self-contradictory. They cannot do the stuff which they would need to do to actually participate in institutions of right. Okay, because right is not only like this fixated stuff that you have written in a law, right? The law, explicit law, is only like the ultimate political expression of right. Okay, so I mean, it's like trying to play chessboard with a pigeon. You cannot,
Yep.
because a pigeon cannot participate in the play of mutual recognized rules that the game needs to be understood and to be played. I think the problem here with these vegan guys who insist so much in the natural rights, in the rights of nature, and the rights of animal, is that they think that they can only defend something like assigning right to the something, right to exist by itself intrinsically, and that's not actually the only way that you can defend ethics towards animals, and towards nature itself. You
Yeah,
don't need to give them rights to defend them, guys.
yeah,
Try,
no,
like, that's the worst way of doing it.
yeah, no. Actually, Pedro, even in AW's video, he was pretty sympathetic to veganism. And it's that, well, I mean, if our society develops in a way where veganism makes the most sense, sure. You don't need to think of animals as moral agents, as opposed to moral patients, in order for that to happen. In order for you to get veganism as a lifestyle. It's not a pro or anti-vegan video. It's just talking about animal rights.
Yeah.
Like, really, like, my point here is like this. If vegans were serious, they would try to pass laws to prohibit everybody from eating meat, okay? Because right is universal. It's not a lifestyle. You know what I mean? If you are
Yeah.
really saying that animals have rights, you are basically saying that we are going to need to change our legislation completely to avoid that, to limit what can be done to an animal in a very deep level. You know what I mean? I'm saying that when you say that when you give rights to animals, you are saying that no one should kill an animal. It's not basically you convincing somebody that maybe you should change your lifestyle to accommodate animals better. No, it says that this change is already done. It's actual in a sense.
Mhm.
Non-existent. The subject is developing and moving past the point of an inherent or innate knowledge, which is trying to reconcile itself with. We are trying to reconcile ourselves with a logos, with something which is logically logically right within being. We are reconciling ourselves with what would be considered natural or with abstract right within reality. You say I'm talking about some sort of abstract terms. No, I'm not.
Abstract
I'm talking
right
about the
in
concrete
reality.
definitions of equality and its application within our society today. What we are considering in that concept and why. The
Again, with
development
this
of the
equality
Hegelian
thing,
dialectic
Hegel's
has
not
has
for
brought us
equality.
here, which is why philosophers
Neither
such
is
as
Marx,
Jeremy
by the
Bentham,
way. Marx
Peter Singer, Thomas Regan,
explicitly
they
wrote
are all
against people who
developing
were charging him
upon
of being an
concepts of
egalitarian.
equality and applying them to animals, which is why when Jeremy Bentham
He said like you have to be an
was it,
idiot
1 minute, Lewis.
to believe in
Jeremy Bentham
egalitarianism of this sort.
What is it that should trace the insuperable line? Is it the faculty of reason or perhaps the faculty of discourse? But the full-grown horse or dog is by far a more communicable or rational animal than an infant, an infant of a week, a month, or a year old. Actually, a day, a week, or a month old. The question is, but if it were not,
See, again, he makes no distinctions of recognizing the difference of kinds. Kinds matter. Like, just with Hegel, the kind of thing we're talking about matters. Obviously, a thing begins somewhere and it ends somewhere. It begins in potential and it ends actualized. Making judgments absolutely without taking into account the kind that it is, even if it isn't right at a point just of mere inception and just mere potentiality, and saying, oh, well, that doesn't matter, it's because at this point it's equal to that. No, it's not. The kind makes a difference. Doesn't matter that, a 1-year-old is as smart as, your 3-year-old cat. They do not have an equal value. The kind matters.
what would it avail? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? That is the question that we are asking.
No, the question isn't about suffering, not for Hegel. Suffering
I don't
means
think they can even
shit.
suffer.
Yeah, depending on what you mean by suffering. If what you mean pain, sure, pain, they can pain. But suffering, if you mean by suffering a sort of psychological disposition, like Buddhists would call craving, which is not just a feeling, but also a recognized, conceptualized form of that, in which you understand your own pain as a certain sort. Animals cannot suffer, properly speaking. But pain, for example, pain is not bad. People are stupid when they think pain is bad. Pain is not, it's not like, oh, good, pleasure is good, pain is bad. No, they're not. Pain is good. That's why it exists. Pain is there for you to intuitively feel an error in existence so that you stop engaging in it. You trip yourself on a rock and, like you bump your knee or you're falling down. It's going to hurt. Why? Because you shouldn't be fucking moving it. And it's going to hurt until you let it heal and can walk again. If you keep trying to walk while it's broken, it's going to hurt. And it's good that it hurts. It's good that there's pain because the pain is the signal that's telling you that rationally you need to stop. And it's not even telling you in a concept, it's telling you in an unignorable feeling.
The only problem is that sometimes the signals of pain and pleasure don't signify things you should stop doing and keep doing. So
not immediately.
I think people will say, okay, yeah, pain is good at signaling these things, but we should create situations where we never feel pain because pain, is symptomatic of these bad things. It's like, well, that's not true either.
Yeah, no, I mean, so for example, if you have social pain in general, like, like the black community feels in the United States, this pain is good in that it signals that there must be a struggle from the black community to bring to light these problems and to make the rest of white and aspiring white America recognize that So long as the black community feels pain, you're going to feel pain too. And that's good. And you go like, but I didn't do anything. I didn't enslave anyone. Doesn't matter. You're dealing in a world in which your own little happy pleasure, within your own house is predicated upon somebody else being in misery, where there doesn't need to be, because we rationally comprehend that there doesn't need to be. We know exactly how to fix the race issue in America. We just don't want to. We want to he and ha and pretend but it's too expensive. All these other things the people who were enslaved aren't even alive anymore. That's not what it's about.
Okay, but what about when good things are painful for you? Because that happens often. Well, I guess not.
But no, that's a case
but...
in which that's a case in which you already rationally understand
You are
that
determining your.
Yeah.
I think
children.
was,
Like education is not fun for a lot of people, and there's a drive today where people say like, oh, let's make education fun. No, education should educate. Whether it's fun or not is irrelevant. There is no reason that it should be fun. In that, well, a lot of your learning in life is fucking painful. That's just a reality, is because you're hitting a wall of ignorance and you're realizing it, and you realize that you fucked up.
Or you might have to make a painful decision, which leads to something better for your friends. Sorry, Pedro.
Wait, let me give you an example. I think it's interesting to think that in terms of imposing form. When you educate yourself, when you are being educated, it's either yourself or another who is imposing form upon you. Okay, so to impose form is also to limit. We know from the beginning of the science of logic that quality is determinateness. It's being with non-being. So there is negation in the imposing of form. It's just like a sculptor who is imposing form in marble. This would be a good analogy. So there is negation, and pain is the feeling of negation, right?
Yeah.
Of being altered, limited in some form. I think many people only when they are thinking about being educated, they are thinking about the positive side of it. Like we have this tendency to take determination in its one-sided, in the one-sided place of being, right? We think we forget that determination also needs non-being, needs nothingness, and so it's natural that education, which is a form of determinate negation, will be kind of painful. But the difference is, like when you smoke crack, you are actually negate in the long term. You are negating yourself abstractly, right? You are not constructing anything. You are only destroying.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of crack, you're not even in the future. You're destroying yourself now. You're putting yourself below a human
Yeah.
being because you don't understand and you don't conceive yourself as a human being. Yeah, I mean, another one
There
is,
will
I
be
mean,
pain in
like
all that is high.
yeah, like what is it? There's a quote by Spinoza. Everything great is as difficult as it is good, or something like that.
Yeah. And there is also determinatio is negatio. To be someone, to be a doctor, to be a philosopher, to be a poet, you must pass through a process of sculpting yourself. And sculpting hurts. It takes things out of you. But this taking out actually has a positive side too. I think this is dialectics, guys. It's the idea that determination has always two sides. It's unity between being and non-being, right? And so anyway, I think that's it.
Yeah, another good example is if you don't know who Sun Ra is, look up Sun Ra. Sun Ra was famous for his discipline. the man lived by discipline, and his motto, well, not his motto, but one of his core ideas and mottos was that you can't be free without discipline. It first comes discipline, and discipline hurts. And if it doesn't hurt, it's not really discipline. You know, you got to practice until your fingers hurt. You got to practice until your voice runs out. You know, only then does it finally get, you know, literally sculpted, you know, quite chiseled into your muscle memory and your bones.
Yeah.
And only after you've done the formality and sculpted yourself to it, only then does it feel natural and come out naturally and freely.
Yeah. Hegel talks about how goodness, how virtue is actually goodness that I bring about by the individual's own effort. So, if you are born in a family that gives you good education and you actually acquire certain good habits, it doesn't mean that you are virtuous. Because virtuosity is exactly when that goodness is brought about by an effort of self-negating, of not clinging to your inclinations, for example, or being this instead of that, and having consistency to attach yourself to a certain direction, right, without roaming around all the time, which is the tendency, right, which is our natural tendency. Which is another characteristic of beings who have rights. They are able to control themselves. How you are going to give right to a thing which is what it is and cannot hold itself, you know, like an animal will behave like an animal, you know, like you cannot expect an animal to be able to not do what he would do, what he did, right? When we say that we are guilty of murder, it's implied in this judgment that we could have done differently. Otherwise, we couldn't be responsibilized by that, you know?
Or at least that
So
we
all this talk about
recognize
right,
our own failure according to what we should have done as well.
yeah, we ourselves are aware of that, and that is shame, right? We have shame. Animals are shameless. That's
Yeah, no. And
another
then when you
thing.
see videos of, you know, those animals where like they do something that, you know, they know has negative consequences, but they do it anyways, and so then they like they eat food off your table or something, and then they put themselves in the corner because they already know that's the punishment. And people are like, you know, they know they did something
Yeah,
wrong. No, they don't. They know the consequence. They know what follows, and they just follow along with it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, dogs looking guilty. I've seen it a lot. I don't buy it.
No,
Yeah,
they
no,
are
there's no
actually
guilt there.
afraid because you
Yeah,
are talking.
They're afraid.
They know when you are talking that way, bad stuff will come. They are able to do these connections.
But it's not because they think what they did was wrong. It's just, oh shit, I don't like hearing loud yelling.
I'm gonna to get in pain soon, somehow. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything I was going to point out, you did a better job of connecting it, but everything AW said about fucking discipline, no animal can ever do that.
Yeah, they cannot discipline
No,
themselves.
they are not autonomous being. They are not autonomous will. They are not capable of doing universal. That is the thing. To be disciplined, you need to be able to think of a certain action as universal, as something which will occur in your life every time a certain circumstance appear. If you cannot think a certain action in terms of its validity and actualization in general terms, right? Not only attached to certain particular circumstances, singular circumstances, but related to a certain universal application, you cannot have discipline, you know? So the fact that we have discipline is possibilitated by the fact that we can think the universal. I think that's the point here. Uh, the difference between what this guy is saying and what Hegel actually says about that. Um,
All right, let's keep going with
I
Hegel.
think his argument
Yeah, his arguments so far are definitely not Hegelian, and even without the Hegel thing, they're not good. Utilitarian arguments are garbage.
The dialectic, and that is the question that leads us to a resounding yes upon the consideration of animals and their value. They matter, we should consider them, and we should protect them in law.
No.
Thank you very much. Are you done?
I am.
Great. Okay. So, Haz, you're going to get 5 minutes. Let me reset the clock.
Skip that.
Within this scheme, you failed to demonstrate how veganism could possibly do that.
Thank you very much, and that's time. All right, Lewis, you're going to get another 5 minutes to respond. Let me reset the clock. Starting
Greetings, brothers.
now.
All right, recording.
Okay, so that was
Join the
I appreciate like why you say that. I do think I did actually respond. I don't think you picked up on it. And if the Cartesian subject was only brought up to recognize, the development of philosophy, then why didn't you mention, let's say, like, I don't know, the Freudian subject or something along those lines, and the ways in which we are balancing ourselves in relation to our desires, which would be more Hegelian. But whatever, if you think that it's philosophically relevant to explicate, is that right? Yeah, your position, that's fair enough. Okay, so where was I? Right. Okay, you said that I am arguing from what is a nihilistic abstract position. Now, and you saying that I am trying to propose some sort of methodology is really just an affirmation of a subjective consciousness trying to impose upon a notion of right from its own subjectivity, which would be what Hegel considers the irony of the subjective. I am not doing such a thing. I'm actually building upon the norms and traditions of our society, which has led us to this.
Actually, no, Haas is right about that. He is doing that. He is just subjectively positing that he believes that consciousness is what is valuable, that, suffering is categorically bad, and therefore, animals should be treated in equality because we are all conscious beings. That's his subjective viewpoint.
Yep. He's only finding what he's already found, right? So he's not making an argument for anything. He's simply asserting his fundamental position, his fundamental value. He's like that kind of principle argumentation, right? I have this principle which says that conscious things should not be killed and consumed. And if conscious things cannot be killed and consumed, so we should respect animal.
Right. And then the second point he's making right. Let him finish this.
Consideration. The concepts that I'm using to our desires, which would be more Hegelian, but whatever, if you think that it's philosophically relevant to explicate, is that right? Yeah, your position, that's fair enough. Okay, so where was I? Right. Okay, you said that I am arguing from what is a nihilistic abstract position. Now, and you saying that I am trying to propose some sort of methodology is really just an affirmation of a subjective consciousness trying to impose upon a notion of right from its own subjectivity, which would be what Hegel considers the irony of the subjective. I am not doing such a thing. I'm actually building upon the norms and traditions of our society, which has led us to this consideration. The concepts that I'm using are widely available. In fact, many of our society already engage in
That's not where you get rights from. Hegel's very clear about this. Right is not just convention. 200 years ago, it was convention that black people being slaves was A-okay. That's not how you get rights. Just because, look, most people agree with me. That's not an argument. Because people may have reasons, but reasons can be very bad. The reasons people thought why, black people should be enslaved and that they weren't really fully human beings were pretty bad arguments. And this is a bad argument too.
Notions of welfareism and the consideration of animals and animal rights. We have laws in the UK which protect animals already, some of which have already been extended, and the UK has just recognized animals as sentient. Hegel also recognizes animals as sentient. Hegel also recognizes animals as conscious. He simply says that they cannot own themselves, so they are not capable of self-consciousness. That's unsurprising. They aren't rational, ethical agents. But this does not give us the right to them. It does not give us the right.
Yes, it does.
Actually,
It gives us the right to everything in the world.
Yes, exactly.
That which does not own itself can be owned by anyone else who claims it as property.
But here's a props for him. It's the first time in this discussion that he actually brings about something which is in the Hegel's text, the distinction of self-owning yourself and stuff like that. Like props for him for that. It's the first time that I actually feel that he have read a certain paragraph, in which he is referring to a concrete discussion in Hegelian terms,
Yep.
To dismiss the fundamental rationality which is imbued within what they are. That is not something that Hegel necessarily dictates. He says they have no right to life and so on like that. Of course he does. It's in his interest. He also says women, who knows how they get educated.
How is it in his interest? That's just a fact.
But
And I'm saying Hegel is wrong on some things, and he himself admits that he can be wrong. In terms of animals, yes, he is wrong. He admits they're conscious. He admits they're sentient.
Yeah, go ahead.
But please show us that he's wrong without pandering to feminism. Like that's the funny part here. Every time he wants to critique Hegel, says Hegel was a fucking misogynist. Okay, but please be logical. Show us why right is something that you should give to animals. Even if they can have duties themselves, they don't have a free will, they are not capable of the universal, which are all fundamental conditions to something to have a right on its own.
Right. I mean, the fact that there are laws against animal cruelty and protecting certain animals is not proof of right at all. It's proof of privilege, and we give privilege to animals and things all the time. Rightfully so, in many cases. Women are not one of them, because women are actually rational, ethical beings. They're spirits. And therefore, I think it's a misogynist thing to compare women to animals, just as Hegel compared them to plants.
Yeah, and he's always talking about black people and women along animals. Like, I hate this. Like, please defend your point. What is the, you know what I mean? What is the relevance of it? Okay, Hegel was wrong about some stuff, but please show us what he's wrong.
Animals have
interests.
Hold on. Animals have privileges afforded by humans, right?
Yep.
But that's good. It's not like people think of privileges as a negative in today's world. It's not. It's not necessarily, at least.
Yep. You gonna add to that, or?
Oh no, I was just saying.
Please.
Like they make the distinction. We make the distinction too, but we say they have privileges, not rights. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Social privileges are afforded to different groups and so on, and that's fine. Sorry, what?
Yeah, we're gonna say something, Pedro. Pedro, we're gonna say something.
No. Please go.
All right.
This basically says that they're incapable of knowing those interests, not that we are incapable of knowing those interests. He points towards subjects which are valuable, but dismisses their value since they cannot become aware of it externally from their.
They're not valuable. Value is for us.
Experiences within reality. He is dismissing an aspect of consciousness because it cannot become aware of itself. Just because it cannot become aware of itself does not mean that it is not positioned within the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic.
I don't even know what he means by the Hegelian dialectic.
What the fuck are you talking about? No. He's saying basically that an animal will acquire right when he is somehow uh, when he somehow put within the dialectics. So dialectics is this machine, and you put something within dialectics, and it goes out of it with rights. I don't know, man. I think
Yeah, I
I
don't know
think
what he's
he's
talking
pretending
about.
to know something. Yeah, it's so confusing, man. Come on, go to your
I
point.
mean,
Show us why animals should have rights.
he just keeps repeating this value thing. I don't know where he gets that from. Value is something we posit with. The very idea of value is ours. Animals may have values implicitly, but they don't even value themselves, and they don't value other animals. So who cares? That's why they eat each other. That's why they fuck with each other. That's why they don't go like, "Hey, this is my place. Can you recognize that?" Like you guys, say, "Oh, it's yours. Sorry about that. I'm gonna go to the next place."
Yeah,
No, they come
yeah.
in and they're like, "Oh, this is a nice place. Oh, there's somebody in here. Better fuck them up and get them the fuck out because it's mine now."
I think I think I think there are animals. They are so limited in what they can or cannot desire that they could not be vegans even if they wanted. You know,
No, they
like
can't. I
you
mean, like a
cannot make
tiger.
a
A tiger, if
vegan
a
lion
tiger was
a
conscious,
tiger.
yeah, if a tiger was
They
conscious
would
or
fucking die.
self-conscious, yeah, they could not be vegans. They have to
And
eat meat.
and there and there are a lot of research telling us that human beings are actually omnivorous. Not that they can either eat vegetable and meat, but they should eat a lot of things, the meat and vegetables and stuff like that. Otherwise, they are fucked.
There's a
So
reason
I
there's the
don't know.
memes
Like,
about the soy boys, Pedro. Eating soy protein
okay,
all your life is not exactly healthy.
you become a plant.
Not only a plant, it like a lot of people just like
we like
they can't do it.
because the problem is like for example, my problem here. I'm going to try to go from his point of view. Okay, so life is important. Life being important, we should not kill life at all. So we couldn't eat anything because when we eat, we are consuming, annihilating a certain thing which is alive. So why not extend this veganism to nothingism? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I disagree.
That's the point.
Mushrooms
Like
want to be
that's the
eaten.
like for example, oh, but there is pain and there is like awareness. Oh, but what if I think that everything which is a whole, which has a certain kind of unification and self persistence and differentiation from the without, what if I put right in that limit? His limit is completely arbitrary. You know what I mean? Like I could extend this argumentation to life itself, and say we shouldn't even eat vegetables. You know what I mean? That's the problem with his argumentation. He's simply positing a certain principle, which is creatures which are in pain, which have awareness, they are invaluable by themselves, so they should not be killed. But I could extend that criteria to include plants too,
Yeah, I mean, as I
and
told you, there
he's
was a
not able
shilingin.
to he's not able to provide an actual reason for as to why we should stop there and extend that to why not to atoms. Let's fight against the tyranny of molecules. Molecules, they are fucking atoms because atoms, they are free, and then they get into those molecular chains and they lose their own individuality. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Like
like this is why I
down
brought
with
up the whole
molecules.
thing. Yeah, this is why I brought up the whole thing. There was a Shilingin who argued with me that plants are conscious to a significant extent. They feel pain, and therefore, cutting down trees for lumber is like the same thing as massacring Africans in the middle of Congo. Uh, the
Yeah,
problem the
yeah.
problem isn't about
That's so
extension.
white.
The problem is not about extension. The problem is simply that it's arbitrary. These people decide that they
Yeah.
believe this, but they can't explain why we ought to believe this beyond just like, well, look, I'm projecting these categories. Why don't you agree with them? Well, because I don't. You think trees are valuable? Why? You think animals are
For
valuable?
example,
Why?
equality. let's make equality absolute, right? Like anyone who is in their good mind could not make something as equality as absolute. If equality were absolute, all would be completely undifferentiated. Okay, we couldn't even have the the capability of choosing between two things or two ways or being vegan or not, because they're all in principle immediately equal. So like if you posit equality as your ultimate principle, against which all will be judged, and you take this idea to its utmost realization, we see that his own position is incoherent, because, well, what is the difference between an animal which is dead or alive? They're all equal. That you know what I mean? Like, so I don't think he has clarified to himself what he's actually doing when he's arguing the way he is arguing. You know?
Well, he's not a Hegelian, so he doesn't think in absolutes. Like that's one of the distinctions between Hegelian argumentation, speculative logic, and other kinds of argumentation. Every step you take it as an absolute step first, and then you have to draw out the contradictory conclusions and figure out how that thing works out. You don't qualify it to begin with, so the whole thing's like, oh, consciousness is value. Well, then you got to posit consciousness as the absolute. And then, why is there a further buildup? Well, you have to explain it. So yeah, like
Yeah.
we've already established this guy has no Hegelian thing about him. Also, to bring up something to think about atoms, by the way, have taught with somebody before, an analytic, who just unproblematically told me existence is value. And I also asked them why, and they're like, well, it just is. They couldn't really give me an argument, but as far as they were concerned, like just stipulating it, defining it so, makes it so. Because they couldn't see what was the difference between just existence and value. They're like, well, and I'm like, I don't see what the identity is. But of course, I'm already presupposing a certain kind of notion of value. But if you define value against some, nobody who speaks normally speaks of value in the way that existence itself is value. Value is always differentiated and relative. So I don't know what ultimately I never figured out what this person meant as to like other than that they thought that we should value existence as such, but to prove that existence is value is a complete different thing. Anyways, let's move on.
Consciousness and then moves to self-consciousness as the middle term. The infinite middle term, which is the conscious reevaluation of itself, is what has led us here. The vegan as an identity, the identity of the animal lover, the carer of animals, those individuals who see themselves as guardians and not persecutors of other conscious beings, have a much greater consideration of consciousness than an individual who is not considering those interests. They are considering interests of an animal who does communicate their interests to us. And actually the funny thing is it is the necessary communication which would have had to have happened to allow the Hegelian dialectic to even form, to produce self-consciousness, which is something recognized by thinkers such as Emmanuel Levinas when he talks about the resistance in the...
Levinas is a fucking moron. I said it. Yeah, fuck Levinas. I had a discussion back and forth with a Levinasian years ago. Went on for a couple months. Long responses. It went nowhere. The whole like, oh, but the other, the other puts its onus on me. Fuck that. Fuck you. Nonsense. Levinas is not a Hegelian. I don't give a shit what Hegelian well, I don't give a shit what Hegelians who just call themselves Hegelians say, and I don't give a shit what Levinas says. The guy's wrong. Beyond that, no, the whole thing about mutual recognition is not that, oh well, that we were dumb animals once, and one day we just kind of recognized. Put aside the problematic story we tell ourselves about how humans came about. Let's just take that the Chomskyan line about, well, thought, language, and recognition came together pretty damn quickly all together at once, so that we never had this interplay. This whole thing of like, oh, we were lone individuals, and we were just kind of living, and we then had to recognize that, oh, this other person's conscious like me. No, that never happened. We are a kind of being that has always been social. However, back we go. The sociality is inherent in us. That's why I have. It starts with the families, starts with communities. By the time this whole master-slave battle to the death thing could ever occur, it was between communities of people who had no problem with recognizing, oh, that they're the same kind of being as I am. The problem was, they're not my group. They're not my clan. Fuck them. Whole different issue. Anyways. About the consideration of consciousness, again, consciousness is not special for Hegel. Freedom is. What we can consider valuable in animals is their freedom. It's not their desires. It's not their conscious experience. It doesn't matter. Animals are dumb, quite literally, and they're stupid, quite literally.
But they're so cute, motherfucker. Don't cute.
Oh yeah.
Let's not.
They're cute.
Cute. Let's not eat cute. I think if his argument was like something like, well, animals are cute, let's not eat them, I think I would be much more satisfied than, well, because Lanuel Levinas and the mirror stage and then the Cartesian subject. And it's funny how he speaks about that as if like those are givens, like that we should begin by the discussion of the Cartesian subject, which is Lacanian for something that Lacan.
Just to make it clear, he was arguing against Haas about that because Haas brought it up. It's not his point. So he's not. He himself was asking like, what's the deal with the Cartesian subject? I don't know why you brought it up.
Okay. Okay. I will make a cigarette and be back soon. But you can continue. Be back soon.
Face, the resistance of the face. Or the ethics of the face and the resistance, the primordial resistance which is necessary for language, which establishes the negation required for determinate objectivity and the production of words. So without this non-linguistic communication, which can be seen within the animal, we would not be capable of producing the middle terms necessary for the Hegelian dialectic to form. So
that doesn't fucking matter, of course. There's pre-linguistic communication, therefore animals should have rights. No. I mean, there's got to be atoms before all that. Does that mean plants ought to have rights? Elements, compounds. That's just completely stupid.
No, I am actually responding to quote-unquote the meat and potatoes of your argument. I'm saying that it's fundamentally wrong. The reality of the situation is, yes, Hegel makes a metaphysical distinction between animals and humans, but only so far as they are not self-conscious. That does not mean they are not conscious. It does not mean that they are not considered within the dialectical process. In fact, they are fundamental and integral.
I don't even know what the fuck he's talking about. They're not considered within the dialectical process. What does that even mean? What's the point of that? Who cares? Like, this is the problem with people who don't know how things work in Hegel, and they're like, oh, dialectics this, speculation that, sublation there. Just throwing out jargon doesn't fucking mean shit.
To it. The understand one and itself with consciousness as indiscernible from consciousness, which is the words he uses in the science of logic, mean that we cannot dismiss any consciousness which exists in nature, which means we are bound.
I can dismiss them. I dismiss them all the time. I stepped on a bunch of ants today. Just, they were in my way, and there was no other way to cross, so just happened. They also get in my fucking room during the summer, and I poison every last one of them because they don't understand. It's my room. If they could understand, I'd happily make a contract with them and say, look, stay the fuck outside. We'll leave little bits of food for you there. But they don't. They keep coming inside my room. If only we could establish spheres of right with fucking dumb animals. If only. By the way, ants are animals according to Hegel. So the whole insects versus all these other things it's a later distinction.
Bound by the laws by the laws of right, which pre-exist our consciousness of them. Hegel was unconscious of them. We have become conscious of them.
Hegel unconscious? Wow. It's kind of hard to believe that one of the most conscious men in history was unconscious of consciousness.
Thank you very much. Let me reset the clock. And you have one final 5-minute response.
Yeah,
I would absolutely disagree with that. I would make the distinction between an agent and a subject in that respect, which is something which fits really well in the Hegelian dialectic because of the development from consciousness to self-consciousness. You say that language presupposes self-consciousness. Quite the opposite. I would say that self-consciousness is the product of language, and I think
absolute moron. Absolute moron. literally, like on my server, the Imperial Trail, the Discord. We've been having this stupid discussion for like the last 2 weeks about people who want to say, like, look, thought is just language. No, it isn't. And self-consciousness is not arising from language at all. Even in the phenomenology, self-conscious arises from desire of desire, long before language.
Yeah.
And also in the Encyclopedia Phenomenology, Subjective Spirit, the same thing happens. It arises from desire of desire. It does not arise from language. So self-consciousness is what enables language, not the other way around. That is just factually incorrect. If you're referencing Hegel.
Yeah, you can think of consciousness without thinking of language immediately, right?
Yeah. Self-consciousness.
I think the problem here is that I don't know I think he's using the concept of consciousness as it is understood by common scientific understanding, you know. I think he's drawing from a certain empirical conception of consciousness and confusing it with Hegel, what Hegel means about consciousness and the phenomenology of spirit, which is not the empirical concept of consciousness. It's actually a very, very simple determination of something which opposes itself to another something, right? Of a knowing which opposes itself to its known, so and knows itself in this opposition.
Well, in this case, Pedro, he's talking about self-consciousness. So, you know, it's like he's moved on from consciousness. He's talking specifically about self-consciousness. But he made the claim that...
Yeah, but is he talking about self-consciousness in Hegelian terms? Because I don't think so. That he's drawing the logic of consciousness, which is obviously present and sublated in the logic of self-consciousness.
Yeah, at least in these, he's responding to something Haas says. We don't know what Haas says, so I'm just going to take it he's talking about self-consciousness. But even then, he's wrong, because consciousness is not arising from language. That's stupid. And it's just incorrect compared to the text of Hegel.
Matter and as being able to hover over our own existence. And this is primarily from the recognition, you know, of each other as having a will or having interests and actions within the world which have separated consciousness, which is the beginning.
All right, he mentioned the will with interests. Having interests is not the same thing as will, you know. Just mere desires, mere drives is not a will. We established that from the very beginning. The will is the rational will. By the way, I mean, like, self-consciousness is, for Hegel, like, the full self-consciousness is self-consciousness of self-consciousness. But basically every social animal that recognizes its kind and other kinds of animals, you know, as animals, not that they have the concept of animals, but they intuit them that way, is operating in self-consciousness. But they're not self-conscious of self-consciousness. Interesting difference.
Of absolute spirit, right? The reality is that the substance of spirit was separated by action. The unified totality of spirit has been separated into individual instances of consciousness because we aren't aware of our universal nature. Now, the reason
That doesn't even make sense. It's not because we're not aware of our universal nature. We're differentiated because we are differentiated. That's the reality. What spirit does is it can recollect this reality and realize, oh, it's actually all one differentiated unity. And because thought is the way in which all differences are unified. I don't know how that's somehow causal to this. I don't even know why he's making this point. Doesn't seem to connect to anything.
Isn't that we, when we do engage in recognition, we do gain a conception of rights. We do actually gain a conception of self, understanding, and we do create civil society and the product of laws which allow us to emulate natural right. But natural right...
Natural right? Where did he pull this shit from? Where did he pull this out of his ass? He hasn't mentioned it this entire time.
Exists.
Here we go.
Even civil society. Hegel actually states, the laws of right are also simply there. We have to become acquainted with them. In this way, the citizen has more firm or less hold of them than they are given to them, and our jurist also abides the same point. But there is a distinction. In the connection with laws of right and spirit, investigation is stirred up and our attention is turned to the fact of the laws. Because they are not different, not absolute, laws of right are established and handed down by men. The inner voice must necessarily collide or agree with them. Man cannot be limited to what is presented to him, but maintains that the standard of right within himself. He is subject to the necessity and the force of external authority. So he even says in that quote, we do hand down the laws of right, but we must collide or agree with them to develop them to correspond with the laws that are simply there. The natural laws which
Okay, that's... What? See, he does this. He does this. He quotes things that say nothing of what he says they say.
That's not what Hegel is saying.
Yeah, exactly.
In that section. And Hegel is saying that law has an external appearance, but a law which is rational emanates from within too. It's not about a law which was before everybody. It's before individual particular will, not before spirit itself. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just saying, like, first, we have our rights there. Only afterwards do we understand the reasoning behind why we have these rights. This is not about, like, oh, there are rights in nature. No, they're not. But, like, look, he's pulling out of that quote nothing that was in that quote. He does this all the time. When I had my little argument with him on Twitter, he kept quoting stuff at me that said almost the opposite of what he said that it said. This guy is that inept, to put it nicely. And he's getting a PhD. I cannot say that that gives me any further faith in the educational institutions.
Exist us the same as the natural laws of physics.
All right. I mean, he was right about that. They pre-exist us as individuals the same way that natural laws pre-exist us. But this does not mean that there are natural laws in nature concerning ethics.
Yeah.
At all?
Yeah, I mean, other than the fact that I would mention that obviously these natural laws are the laws of consciousness and not self-consciousness, which is the awareness of those laws.
There are no laws of consciousness. I don't know what the fuck this guy's talking about. Anyways, since that is the end of the actual debate, that's where I'm going to end it. It's pretty good. That's about as long as I expected it, about 2 hours. For those of you who commented in my videos before and said, maybe I should debate this guy, understand that to put myself in a debate with this guy is to literally insult myself, to pretend that we are on an equal footing of intellectual capacity and even just textual knowledge. This guy is worse than small fry. He is an insult to the existence of my intelligence. I will not debate him because he is inept. In this debate, almost everything that Haas brought up, I can vouch for, and I can say Haas was right. Haas at least went by the text. He didn't. And notice that the whole disagreement is mainly about him claiming to be a Hegelian, and that's the main thing. If I were to argue with him about the paper I wrote on animal rights, because of his self-proclaimed Hegelianism, a lot of the argument would devolve into this Hegel citation thing, which it would not be interesting to me, and that's exactly why I am going to refuse, and I have refused to debate him. It would not be interesting to me. It would not be worth my time. Anyways, that's it for that. We refuted his standpoint as much as it can be refuted. Insofar as the texts are the texts, they don't lie. So, for those of you listening, hopefully you find this entertaining. Don't ask me to talk to this guy. See you around.